Is Elemental Shaman still the best range DPS in the game? Well, I'm not sure if it's the best, but it's definitely fighting very hard for the top spot, giving a lot of other DPS specs in the game a run for their money. You didn't expect me to answer this in the first 10 seconds of the video now, did you? So stick around for the talents, gear, essences, rotation, take this into raids and dungeons, and then you can tell me if Elemental is the best DPS spec in the game. Before we kick it off with the talents, there's also a very crucial thing that you need to do, and that's subscribing to our channel, and even more important, click that bell thingy. Goddamn YouTube! It's the only extra thing that you need to do, unless YouTube starts adding more buttons for you to click so they know that you want our shit in your feed. Onwards! For the first talent row, you want Echo of the Elements. This bad boy gives you 2 charges to Lava Burst, making the cooldown reset effect grant you a charge instead. This means more Lava Bursts, and more Lava Bursts will synergize with a few more things down the road. We can make an argument about Earthen Rage if you don't have Igneous Potential as the Azerite trait, another thing to be discussed later on, but really, without this trait, the spec will underperform to the point that you really want to have it. As such, Echo of the Elements remains a default choice for all content. Second row, you have 2 options. Totem Mastery is the best performing single target option, specifically in raids, since you will be in its range pretty much for the entire fight. Mathematically, it's good in dungeons as well, but the fact that you have to move a lot from pack to pack, the GCDs you would have to spend to recast it will make it very inefficient. The alternative option for mythics will be Aftershock instead. Aftershock works well with the nature of dungeons encounters, where you want high AoE burst to clear packs fast. During prolonged fights, this talent loses strength, which is why you can take advantage of its raw DPS output only in dungeons and not raids. Third row is one of the utility rows you will get. Spirit Wolves is the general pick here. Not only will it give your Ghost Wolf more speed, but also damage reduction, which can be exploited in different situations if you are creative enough. Or if not, pick whatever you want as long as you can take advantage of its full effect. Fourth row is Master of the Elements, no questions asked. This is mandatory with Echo of the Elements and vice versa. The nature of the build will focus on many Lava Burst procs for high damage, and this talent plays really well into that. It will also add an interesting dynamic to your rotation. It will be a bit more difficult to play, but not so much that you should sacrifice the amount of damage this baby provides. Fifth row is yet another utility row, and here you actually have choices to make, and mostly based on your group. Nature's Guardian is the default option, good in all cases and a lifesaver in some of them. The other options relate strictly to your group, mostly raid, responsibilities. Are you healing the tank or spot healing soakers? Are you the one providing the group with short bursts of speed to handle a certain mechanic or transition? Depending on your role, this role will be flexible. If you have nothing assigned to you, pick the default option instead. The sixth row is another 2-option row. For the most single target damage output, and usually your raid option, pick Ice Fury. Ice Fury will be yet another thing to manage in your rotation, which adds a bit of depth if you're looking to perfect your elemental build. Not to mention, it's the best single target DPS option on the row if you can play it properly. If you are not that confident yet, or simply want to do dungeons, Primal Elementalist is the alternative. Seeming very close in single target to Ice Fury, Primal Elementalist starts to pull ahead in AoE scenarios, of which dungeons have many. The last row, Stormkeeper, is the best choice you can make. Affecting both Lightning Bolt and Chain Lightning, it will work wonders in any situation, providing massive bursts of damage and Maelstrom generation. It also synergizes with Master of the Elements. Going forward, regarding everything I will recommend you take and do will be strictly tied to the build, talent, Azerite and such mentioned in this video. You can opt to change talents and gear choices if you like, but at that point, stuff in the guide might not be as relevant or optimal to you anymore. With that being said, the general stat priority, accepted by the community, follows intellect at the top as the main stat and strongest. After that, versatility will be the best bet, followed closely by crit, with haste and mastery tied at the bottom. When starting out, or if you're more comfortable, then stick with this priority and you should be fine. However, if you want to aim and get the best of the best out of your character, then you will need to sim. Go to raidbots.com and you will find a lot of cool options to simulate for, and one of which will be your stat weights. As an example, my stat weights are like this, which for me puts intellect way below other stats, meaning eye level won't be as much of a priority as for other people. This will only matter if you really want to get the most out of your damage output. With this in mind, you can proceed to gear yourself better, specifically when it comes to rings and trinkets. Rings are a bit easier since they're just stat sticks. There are trinkets that are simple stat sticks as well, which could work very well for you. There are also a few trinkets that are performing way above the rest. One of those is the Leviathan's Lure that drops from the underwater behemoth in Eternal Palace. This will start to work even better once you have bigger levels of versatility, since the damage it deals scales with this particular stat. Your second option that you should be aiming for will be the Shiver Venom Relic from the first boss of the raid. It has an AoE effect in the way it deals damage and again scales with versatility, meaning it will perform a lot better than most other trinkets if you already have a lot of versatility stacked. An alternative, and probably the easiest trinket to get, is the Highborn Compendium of Storms, a very simple trinket that you can buy off the auction house or make with inscription. As the 400 eye level only version, it will outperform all the 430 eye level trinkets in the game, except for the two mentioned earlier. A very good option to get until Leviathans and Shivers drop for you. Moving on to the Azerite trace, this is where shit gets easy. Yeah, okay. Igneous Potential. Done. Let's go grab a drink. No, really, you want Igneous Potential stacked 3 times, and I dare say this is the reason Elemental Shamans are viable, and not only viable, but among the top raid DPS in the entire game. This trait is so good that even Resto Shamans take it. The damage it provides is just way too amazing. The second trait you want that seems to outperform all the others is Natural Harmony, again stacked 3 times. This is a general buff trait that takes full effect when playing with Ice Fury, since you need that frost damage proc. That doesn't mean it's not good in dungeons as well. It is. The only thing left is if you don't have 3 of each, you can fill in with what you have, and to get the best option out, you'll need to sim. The impact will be minor though if you're not simming, since the traits you want to aim for are the 2 mentioned earlier anyway. For the secondary and tertiary traits, try to get Overwhelming Power or an equivalent stat boost if not. And the defensive trait should be Impassive Visage, since you stack so much versatility and this trait works wonders with large amounts of versatility. On to the essences, there will always be combinations and variations that you can do depending on your gear and ranks of said essences. The recommendations you will receive will take into account you having them at rank 3 so as to establish a point of reference and what to aim for. That doesn't mean you cannot go around and play with your other toys. When raiding, Condensed Life Force as a major still seems to be the best for all DPS at this point. Crucible of Flame as your first minor should be your next option, with Conflict and Strife as your second minor. For dungeons, you have a bit more freedom, but generally, Blood of the Enemy will be your major, with the same minors as the ones for raiding. So really, you'll only be changing your major essence when switching between content. All of these are baked into a nice recipe, making Elemental great as far as range DPS go. No, really, it's one of the few specs in BFA that you can argue about having some proper class depth, and we will explore this and more in the rotation section. But don't forget to explore our Twitch. Yeah, baby, I just said that. Listen, we stream 4 times a week and we go into more advanced class stuff every time we do. And if you have any questions or tips that you want to know that weren't covered in the guide, hop onto our Twitch stream. I'll be waiting. The complicated part of the rotation is to blend in Master of the Elements with the instant Lava Burst procs and Ice Fury charges. This will change drastically based on your haste and actual procs, and mastering this aspect of your rotation can make the difference between good DPS and amazing DPS. Don't be put off if you don't get this off the bat. If you practice it enough, it will be more than worth it. For the opener, you start with Totem Mastery around 7 seconds before the pool. 5 seconds before, cast Stormkeeper. 3 seconds before the pool, cast your Fire Elemental. Quickly after, pre-pot and pre-cast your Lava Burst, making sure that your projectile is flying, and while so, you apply Flame Shock so the Lava Burst will crit upon impact. Cast a Lightning Bolt, then Ice Fury, then another Lava Burst and move into your normal priority. The only difference between Elemental Opener and most other specs is that you have a lot of spells to cast before the fight actually starts if you want to be efficient. Any Azerite essences should be used on cooldown or delayed a few seconds if it can line up with another major cooldown. The single target priority is just that, a priority of the abilities to be casted based on their importance. Totem Mastery is at the top since the buffs it gives are too good to delay. Next, make sure your target has Flame Shock on. Use your elementals on cooldown. Stormkeeper on cooldown as well. Earth Shock next, especially if it can be buffed by Master of the Elements. Ice Fury next if you anticipate having to move and need to prepare Frost Shock charges before that happens so you can DPS while moving. Frost Shock if it's buffed by both Ice Fury and Master of the Elements. Next, Lava Burst if available. Flame Shock if the remaining one has 7 seconds or less before dropping off. Earth Shock if you are above 60 Maelstrom. Frost Shock if it's buffed by Ice Fury. Ice Fury if it can come off cooldown by the time you need it again to move. Refresh Totem Mastery. Fill in with Lightning Bolt. There are specific conditions baked into each ability, and this is probably the most complicated part of the spec. When fighting 3 targets, replace Lightning Bolt with Chain Lightning in your rotation and keep the rest similar to the single target rotation. Try to keep Flame Shock up on all 3 targets and replace Earth Shock with Earthquake at 2 or more targets. When fighting 4 or more targets, Chain Lightning will be at the forefront. Dump Maelstrom on Earthquakes, and if you can, manage your GCDs properly and the mobs will live long enough, keep Flame Shock on 4 targets. More will probably not be feasible. When trying to decide what spell to cast with Master of the Elements buff, there is a list of what's most important to the least, and here it is. Earthquake if 2 or more targets can be hit. Next is Lightning Bolt when buffed by Stormkeeper. Earth Shock is the follow-up in line. Then Frost Shock buffed by Ice Fury. Then the actual Ice Fury spell. Then a naked Lightning Bolt, and lastly a naked Frost Shock. This will be difficult to maintain, but the more you manage to buff the proper spell with Master of the Elements, the better your DPS will be. Also, here's a neat little macro for your Elemental's ability when using the Primal Elementalist's talent. I've been using this without fail for months and should work just fine for you as well. The consumables will be fairly straightforward with a strong inclination towards versatility. Your ring enchants will be a Cord of Versatility, while your gems will be Versatile Dark Opal. Notice I did not mention the Intellect one simply because Intellect is simming poorly for me. You can use one if you like, just keep in mind that it will be nerfed soon. The weapon should have the Machinist's Brilliance. The proc rate of this bad boy is pretty good, not to mention the stats themselves are very welcome. Stay off the alcohol and drink the Endless Fathoms flask instead, and the Superior Battle Potion of Intellect. Pretty standard, no surprises here. As for the food, the feast will work wonders, and seeing you would only get this in raids, use Biltong everywhere else when you cannot feast on the feast. Browse our channel because we have a lot of other guides ready for 8.2 and your lovely delightful fingers. This and more has been made possible in no small part by our patrons. We really appreciate this, guys, and thank you very much from the bottom of our hearts. And if you are interested to see what this is all about, then all the details are in the description of the video. Oh, and maybe you'll see our Teespring link with some merch. See this? Likey. Well, you can grab this by clicking the link down below. Thanks for watching the video. Take care and have an awesome day.